Well, good. I'm glad it is recording. Bless your little heart. Okay. Let's see here. Well, I know we've talked about science on these calls before, but I don't think I've ever done a complete one completely on this topic. So we will dive in a little deeper here tonight. But anyway, so yeah, there's no doubt that there's always actually I dealt with 3 people today on the campus that brought up science to me. Science. Anyway, now let me suggest something that if you go to this website, type in Ratio Christi, type in that website there. And if you go to the resources page, see where it says resources right in the middle here? That's why I have that right there. There are a lot of free ebooks on there that you can download by scholars on really cool topics. Okay. They're short, they're about 20 to 30 pages. But if you ever need like a little resource, something that you want to brush up on apologetics, there's all kinds of little booklets that are really cool, written by really highly credentialed people. Like you can get Stephen Meyer's book, and a very shortened version of it. Like if you want a 20 to 30 page overview, you can get this on the call. I mean, this on the website. You have to type, they'll ask you to fill in your name and email, and then you'll be able to download it after that. So you go on there and you find these little booklets. Here's one here. You can get his book Signature in the Cell as well. Stephen Meyer is the premier philosopher of science these days. You can get this book on scientism, which we're going to talk about tonight, by J.P. Moreland, who's a brilliant guy in the topic. You can download that little booklet. You can download Has Christianity Opposed Science by Michael Keyes. I had him on a Zoom call. If you go through my YouTube channel, go through clips, we had him on a couple years ago. We talked about the supposed warfare between Christianity and science, all those myths that have been out there for decades. So he has a great book on the topic. He has a little book here you can download, but these are really short booklets. So I recommend after tonight, if you want to go deeper, you just want some little reading, some light reading, like little short booklets, you just download those on your computer or whatever and read them, okay? Go to that website. Like I said, go back right here, ratiochristi.org, go to resources, okay? If you want like full-length books, get Michael Keyes' book, Unbelievable, 7 Myths About the History and Future of Science and Religion. He covers a lot of the myths that have been out there forever about the conflict or the supposed conflict between science and religion. You can get John Collins' book, Science and Faith, Friends or Foes. You get J.P. Moreland's book, Scientism and Secularism. Those are all excellent resources if you want to go deeper. But there's no doubt that science, J.P. Moreland has noted this in his books, Kingdom Triangle and Scientism and Secularism, that science just plays a huge, it's just overall in academia and our culture, science just has a lot of authority. People think of what we can know, what we can really know is trusted, reliable knowledge. It's science, right? Now, of course, we had a huge conflict during the COVID years, a huge debate going on about how trustworthy is the scientific process. And we found out that science doesn't really say anything. It's actually the people that interpret the data and come to their conclusions. They present it to the public. They're the ones that say the things. It's the people. It's not when someone says science says, that's not true. Scientists are the ones that interpret the data. People are the ones who interpret and make their conclusions. So really not science, it's the scientists that's interpreted and presented to us, okay? And, with some people out there, you always want to know, you want to try to figure out what their truth language is. Like what is it that they think speaks, what field of study, or what is it that they think really is something you can trust? It's really their mode of truth. Like, yeah, if I want to know something's true, I trust this or I trust that. And for a lot of people out there, of course, their truth language is science, dealing with, where you're dealing with like scientific, empirically minded people that still think science is the best or the most reliable way to form knowledge or know things. You see a lot of people out there that believe this, despite the skepticism towards science these days, that there's problems and there needs to be a lot of corrections, as we know. And we know the scientists are fallible. We know they make mistakes. We know they're driven by money like anybody else. They're driven by getting more credentials, getting more exposure, getting a larger platform. Not all of them, but obviously there's plenty of them that, have wrong motives, as we know. I can't prove that all the time because I can't look into someone's motives, but we know there's issues out there. Okay. So, it's just like, like JP Moreland says that, when you think of science the way it's presented in our culture, a lot of people view science as the most reliable form of knowledge. It's supposedly objective, it's public, it's trustworthy. It's not based on subjective opinion. It's based on observation, testing, forming a hypothesis, coming to conclusion, peer review, supposedly, where there's a lot of peer review studies. That's debatable too, how reliable that is these days. And then, but sadly, what that means is a lot of people use faith or religion is more of a private, subjective thing. It's not grounded in any kind of knowledge. So really, when you say you have faith, that's just viewed as like not knowing anything. It's just like, yeah, I just believe and hope for the best, right? I just have faith is belief. My aunt said that to me once, that, it's faith is belief, but she really believed that when you say belief, that means like you don't know anything. It's just like you just hope for the best. Okay. So science seems to supposedly be the alternative to that it's totally objective, public, and trustworthy, based on hardcore data. And so that's a problem. Mark Twain once said, not about science necessarily, but this is his definition of faith. He said, faith is believing what you know ain't so. So basically saying that you really don't know anything. And sadly, that definition is childish as it is, kind of carried over in a lot of atheists thinking. Some of the atheist writers, when they went to define faith, one guy named Peter Boghossian, he's an atheist. He says faith is pretending to know what you don't know. Richard Dawkins, a well-known biologist who has been one of the biggest atheist evangelists over the last 20 years, it's kind of calmed down a little bit. But he said faith is belief without evidence and reason. Coincidentally, that's also the definition of delusion. Sam Harris, another well-known science and faith, or one of those famous atheists that came out in the last 20 years, said faith is generally nothing more than the permission religious people give one another to believe things so strongly without evidence. So these are all poor definitions of faith, and they're really childish, to be honest, and misunderstandings. But, like Dawkins says here, he says, faith is the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. Faith is belief in spite of, even perhaps because of, the lack of evidence. So, they came out with these writings or these silly things. And of course, we had a lot of responses to them. A lot of Christian apologists responded to them, and philosophers. So don't worry about it. They're not really that formidable, and they're not really, no one takes them that seriously. They sell a lot of books, though. They did sell a lot of books, sadly. But, perhaps you remember the Indiana Jones movie, The Last Crusade, where, Indy takes the leap of faith, right? He supposedly, he hopes for that bridge to show up on that ledge, and he's looking out, and he just believes. And if you believe hard enough, something will appear. And so, people kind of view that. Sometimes faith is just believing something as hard as you can, even though it's not based in reality. Sometimes a leap of faith term is taken to mean it's just believing something, no evidence for it. That's not what biblical faith is, though. That's not the definition of biblical faith. So Great Coco gave a great correction on faith, the word faith, the way it's used in our culture. And, he said, Christians do not use faith in order to discover knowledge. Rather, faith is their response to knowledge they've already obtained by some other means. And what he's saying there is that if you think about how you become a Christian, you responded to the knowledge God gave you. Okay, we respond to the knowledge God has communicated to us. He reveals knowledge of who he is to us. So that's like when you say, I know God exists now. I know Jesus is the Messiah. I know Jesus rose from the dead, or I know he's the Son of God. You're saying you have knowledge. That's what know means, right? I know I have, that's what that means. I have knowledge. Just like you say, I know Eric. You're saying I have knowledge of Eric. Now, it may go beyond that into relational knowledge where you really know someone relationally, right? Intimately. And that happens too. So that's part of our relationship with God as well. But the point is that we responded to God revealing knowledge of himself to us. We responded to how he revealed knowledge of himself through creation. That's one way he reveals himself, through the created order. We can look around the natural world and have knowledge of God by observing things in the world of nature, whether it be the universe or features on planet Earth or the human body or biology or chemistry or whatever it is, other things. And then we respond to that knowledge. Then we say, yeah, and then we respond and say, yes, I now choose to trust in God. I trust in Jesus. I'm responding to the knowledge that's been given to me, right? Even when you share the gospel with somebody, you're communicating knowledge, right? You're communicating, you're giving them the knowledge of who Jesus is. Now they have to trust in Jesus and obviously believe and enter into that relationship. But the point is, that's what you're doing. You're giving them the information so they can make an informed decision. Okay. So when we say faith, our definition of faith means we have knowledge. Okay. So remember, biblical faith is trust or confidence in something or someone. Of course, that's God or Jesus. That's based on knowledge or good reasons, right? Because when you guys think about all the commitments you make in life, whether it be you married someone or picked a job or where to live, what's sport to spend time doing, or how to invest your money, whatever it is, you always had generally good reasons before you made that commitment, right? And you trust, just like when if you did get married, you made a step of commitment. You took a step of commitment on your marriage day, the day you made your vows. But you had some reasons, I assume you did, for why you chose that person. Just like if someone says to you, why'd you pick that career? Why'd you pick where to live here? Or why'd you invest your money here? You generally have some good reasons, right? Why you trusted in that investor, why you trusted in taking that job, trusting that employer. That doesn't mean you had absolute certainty, probably, but you still had some good reasons, okay? And so you have to apply that sometimes to why you've chosen to commit to the God of the Bible and Jesus the Messiah, right? That's what we do. We've been doing on these calls, of course, giving you reasons. Now, some people, as we'll get back to later, but some people view faith as like a God of the gaps argument. That's where you have something out there that you see looks like it needs to be explained by God. And then the sciencey people come along and say, no, you can't plug God into that. Trying to invoke God as an explanation for that, because science will figure it out one day and we'll come up with a scientific explanation, and you're just plugging God in there as an explanation. That's a God of the gaps argument. So that's not what we're doing, but some people, we have been accused of that over the years. I'll talk about that more as we go on here. And some people will definitely come along and say, I'm agnostic. I like science. I heard that today 3 times, or I'm a science person and I don't care if people have faith, but that's belief. They view, like I said, they view faith as belief. Science is what you can know, right? That's just a misunderstanding of the definition of faith. So the first thing we need to realize, we need to ask, what do we mean by science? And, believe it or not, there is no universal agreement about how to define science. But, most see it as some kind of a general definition would be that most people would see it as like an organized, systematic, and cumulative pursuit of knowledge, generally about the natural world, because science only studies the natural world, through the rigorous testing of hypotheses, right? And so hypotheses, forming observations, forming a hypothesis, and then coming to a conclusion. But there's technically really no, if you try to find a definition of science, they don't always agree, believe it or not. Now, there is something called scientism, which that's where some people think that science is the only way of knowing anything. It's the only theory of knowledge, which if you study what's called epistemology, that's the study of how you know things, which you do that all day long when you try to figure out how you know something. There's different kinds of epistemology, but science is a kind of epistemology where it's a study, it's a theory of knowledge. But what they do in scientism is they reduce all knowledge down to the scientific method. They say this is the only way to know things are true is through the scientific method or through the natural sciences. So that's what we call, it's what we call reductionism. They reduce everything down, a complex thing such as knowledge, which knowledge is a complex thing. They reduce it down to one thing, reduce it all the way down to one way of knowing, which is what we say it's reductionistic, and it doesn't work, by the way. This guy, when he wrote this book, Alex Rosenberg, he's actually a Jewish atheist. He teaches at Duke. I may be retired now, but he wrote a book, I think about 8 or 9 years ago, called The Atheist Guide to Reality. And he is what we call a reductionist, where he's using scientism, totally believes science is the only way of knowing anything. So in his book, like when he asks these questions, is there a God? He says, no. What is the nature of reality? What physics says it is? See, he says, whatever science says it is, physics is a branch of science. What is the purpose of the universe? There is none. What is the meaning of life? Nothing. Why am I here? Just dumb luck. And why should I be moral? Because it makes you feel better than being immoral. So here's an example of a guy that really reduces all of reality down to science. Science explains everything. So you can see why it doesn't work, because really some of the questions he's asking here can't be answered by science. They're answered by philosophy or theology. But the point is that he's really trying to reduce science down to the only way of knowing things, okay? And this is what he says. He says that the methods of science are the only reliable ways to secure knowledge of anything, as the only rational ideology one could possibly hold in the face of what science tells us about the way the world is. So there you go. The problem with that argument is that Rosenberg is assuming something. And, an analogy you can use with people, which is really good, is the metal detector analogy. If you're ever talking to people that are saying, science is the only way of knowing things, and science is the most reliable form of knowledge, and I like science, and blah, 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 blah. Well, science only studies material and natural things. It only looks for material and naturalistic explanations to things. It doesn't look for supernatural explanations. It doesn't look for non-physical explanations. If the guy's out with his metal detector on the beach, by the way, I always see them when I'm on the beach in Myrtle Beach, especially nighttime too, with the little lights on their hats. What are they going to find with that metal detector as they're going around the beach? That metal detector is only designed to find metallic objects, right? It's not designed to find anything else. Okay. Now, just because that guy's using a metal detector and he's only going to find metal if it's there, does that mean there's nothing else out there besides metal on the beach? I don't think so. I mean, there's pieces of rubber, plastic, glass, cans. Well, that's metal, but I'm saying there are things outside of the metal detector that he can't find, right? With that, because that tool is only designed to find metal things, metallic things. So that's just what you tell people with science. Just because science is set up to find only material and natural things. It doesn't mean there's no other way to find other things. There's no other tools out there to discover reality. There has to be other tools we use. Okay. And there are. So that's an analogy I use with people. I think it's pretty helpful. They generally understand it once I explain it, generally. But, he's assuming, back to Alex Rosenberg, he's assuming, as I said, there's only one way of discovering reality or explaining reality. Science, if you want to, look at this way, science can agree on what we observe, but it's really restricted to study how the mechanisms work behind what we observe in the natural world. Okay, so let me give an example of that. So if you go under your car hood, go out to your car tonight, pull up your hood, and some of you may know cars better than others, I understand, but you're studying all the parts under your car, all the engine, the combustion parts, everything. So you study how those mechanisms work, and you're an auto mechanic, you work on them all day maybe. But that doesn't mean just because you figure out how the mechanisms work that there isn't an agent who designed the mechanisms, right? It doesn't mean there's no Henry Ford or whoever designed that car. You can study the mechanisms all day long, but it doesn't mean there's nobody out there that didn't design the mechanisms, right? So philosophy generally deals more with the why questions. Like, if I look at under my hood and I say, wow, this works really well, I know how it works. And well, somebody say, why does it work so well, Eric? Why does your engine work so well? Why does this work a certain way? Well, I guess it just does. That's where science is limited. That's what science would say. No. Obviously, if someone asked me that, why does your engine work so well? I would just say, well, whoever designed it did a really good job. But the reason it works so well is because the person who had that blueprint in their mind of how it should work and designed it really did their job. So philosophy asks probably the deeper questions, the why questions. And science only deals with really impersonal explanations. They're not personal explanations, right? Impersonal. Okay. Personal explanations are we are personal explanations, like when people attribute people to explaining things, right? Because we have the power to choose things. Like if I said my car works really well, the parts, people say, why does it? I would say, well, there's obviously a personal agent who designed these mechanisms to work well, right? No impersonal process could explain that. Okay. So there's other kinds of explanations out there besides just looking at an impersonal scientific explanation, okay? There's nothing wrong with that explanation, but it's limited, okay? So Rosenberg is very limited in what he can do with his scientism, okay? It can't explain all of reality. And so remember that when you're thinking of science, science is predominantly works by what we call methodological naturalism, meaning that science only looks for natural explanations. As I said, it studies the natural world. It looks for natural causation, it looks at cause and effect relationships, and it looks for natural explanations or material explanations. Now, what we call metaphysical natural, and that's more philosophy. That's where people just assume ahead of time that all that exists is the natural world. All that exists is nature itself. There's no God. There's nothing. Nature is all there is. And then science comes along and says, okay, we'll study nature. We'll take that, and then we'll study nature and look for natural explanations. Well, if someone's gonna, one day I was talking to two atheists on campus, these two Jewish atheist kids, and they were just going off about how great science is, science. And I said, are you promoting some sort of metaphysical naturalism? Like, do you believe the natural world is all there is? They're like, well, yes. And I said, so you're saying science has shown that? And they're like, yes. I said, no. you're starting with philosophy. You're already presupposing the natural world is all there is. That's a philosophical claim. And then you're using science, the scientific method, to back that up. But science is only going to look for naturalistic explanations anyway. So I kind of got them down to understanding they're really doing philosophy on some level. They're not doing science. Okay. All right. That's why sometimes, when people talk about the God of gaps argument, they're like, oh, there's something out there in the world we can't explain. We'll just plug God. You plug God in as an explanation, and we'll figure out a way to explain it through science. And I generally say, well, I guess you have a nature of the gaps explanation then. You're saying, well, there's a gap in knowledge, you'll just fill it in with nature. Like nature itself will explain everything, right? No mind behind the nature, just nature itself. It's just all powerful. It can do anything. Now, in our faith, though, of course, we believe God is the agent behind nature, right? He can use nature in any way he wants, right? He's behind the mechanisms of nature. So the problem with people who don't have God in the mix is they think nature just does it all on its own. And that's pretty hard to believe when you look at the way the universe is set up, the way planet Earth is set up, the way first life gets going, the way your DNA code works, just to say that nature by itself somehow anticipated a perfect universe that needed to be there, and planet Earth, it just planned it all by itself. Nature just figured it out all on its own. No mind, no intelligence. That's a leap of faith, by the way. So also when you're talking to people, whenever they bring up science and they say, well, science, I'm a sciencey person, and science is, I just don't think God and science can be fixed with, can be reconciled, and they're opposed to each other, and blah, 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 blah. You always should ask them, what branch of science would you say has shown God does not exist? Like I had a guy say that to me today, like 2 hours ago. He said, well, I think science has shown, that God's not needed anymore. Eventually science will show that God's just doesn't need, we don't have any need for God. Science will eventually just get rid of God. And I said, well, which branch of science are you talking about? You can't just say science. Which branch? Are you saying that physics, chemistry, biology, geology, astronomy will eventually show there's no need for God? Do you mean like the social sciences, linguistics, history, psychology, anthropology, sociology? Are those fields going to show us there's no need for God? Or, the sciences like engineering and computer science, that means they're going to show there's no need for God anymore? All those different kinds of sciences? No, he had never heard that before, but that's why I brought it up. And I didn't say it to be snarky, but I got him you get him to think. That's what you do. You put a pebble in their shoe, as Greg Kokel says. Does science prove anything? Actually, no. It doesn't prove anything if you mean like it's absolutely certain. Observations, interpretations are never perfect, as we have found out a lot over the last 3 or 4 years. And information is a lot of times incomplete. And information one week information may come in here, and new information comes in the next week, as you know. We found that out during COVID. The narrative was shifting every other week, it seemed. So it was just a moving target. So like I said, if someone says, but the science says, I don't accept that. I say, you mean the scientists say, right? The scientists say, right? Don't use science as a noun. Like says science says. No, that doesn't make any sense. Okay. I know what they're trying to say, but that's how I respond to them. Now, in proving things, yeah, math and logic, you get what's called deductive certainty. That means that's certain. There's no questions. There's no way to wiggle around 2 + 2 is 4 and 7 × 5 is 38. Ah, gotcha. 35. Anyway, there's no getting around math and logic. That's what we talk about, deductive certainty. But science is built more on what we call induction. That's more probabilistic. It's not absolutely certain. And also in science, there's a lot of inferential reasoning. That means they make inferences. They look at the data and then they make an inference, the best guess, the best possible explanation. But it's not 100% certain. Science studies a lot of things in the past that we weren't there to see. No one was there to see the beginning of the universe or see how life began or to see how planet Earth got going or how the first life started. They compile the data and they come up with hopefully the best explanation. We do the same thing with our thing with God. We look at the universe. It's in the past. We weren't there to see how it came to be. We weren't there to observe any of it, but we think God is a better explanation for those things than just a naturalistic alternative. Okay. Science, it can't prove certain things. It has to presuppose them. It uses these things to do science. It doesn't, science doesn't prove logic, math, or morality, right? It needs those things to even do science. It presupposes being able to use logic and be able to use mathematical truths. And morality, science can't really tell us what's immoral. It just describes what something is. It describes what a behavior is. It doesn't tell you what to do, like how to be moral. Science also presupposes that, the laws of nature themselves are stable and constant and, uniform. It's not they're not chaotic, but it doesn't study things like metaphysical truths, things beyond the physical world. That's what metaphysical means, beyond the physical world. Okay. God's beyond the physical world. We say God's an explanation for things. We're making a metaphysical claim. It doesn't really deal with the why questions. As I said, the big existential questions. Science doesn't really answer the question, why am I here? Or what is the meaning of life? Or why be moral? Or do I have a purpose? It's restricted, as I said, to only look for material and physical explanations to reality. It doesn't deal with the big metaphysical questions. And we need other tools to discover reality, as I said, to answer those questions, such as philosophy and theology. So anyway, now remember, when we think about God, you're thinking of God. God's the only way we know what God is, his nature, is if he reveals it to us. No one can fully comprehend his nature, but unless God shows us what he's like and what his nature is, we're not going to know. And so we don't know how to, if we're going to think about God's existence, what kind of object is God? I mean, the nature of the object would determine how we know. What is God? Is God, like I said before, is God like a physical car or a house? Is he put together? Does he have parts? Is he material? Is that kind of what God is? Some people think he should be that way. That's what science studies. Science studies physical, material things, but God doesn't fit into that category. He's not like a physical object that you can see with your eyes and touch with your hands. And he fits into different categories. So just like I've said before, these things, we can't see them. You can't see with your eyes. You don't see directly. You don't see electrons directly or protons, neutrons, atoms, electric fields, magnetic fields, gravitational fields. I don't see justice. There's no justice molecule. I don't see consciousness of other human beings. What I do see is I see the effects of these things. Why they're not directly observable to us, I can see the effects of them. I see the effects of justice. I see the effects of an electromagnetic field or a proton or neutron, whatever, but we don't see them directly. Okay. So we make inferences, we infer the existence of electrons by the behavior of charged particles, or we infer the existence of electric fields or magnetic fields by the behavior of charged particles, or the existence of wind. We don't see wind directly. We see the effects of the wind, right? By looking at the branches on a tree moving, right? That's the same way it is with God. We know God exists by his effects. Okay, his effects are in the world all around us, and we can infer that he's there. I mean, there's a universe that's set up for life, and the universe is there, that's an effect That's the effect. I need a cause for that. What's the cause? The cause would be God or a designer. Okay. Or I observe the effect, like we have a DNA code that's rigged with so much information larger than, I think, 5,000 encyclopedias or larger. And, there's effects we observe all around the natural world that we can infer God exists. Okay. And so that's how we know God exists, by his effects. Jesus is the effect. He's the biggest, he's the most influential person in history. He's left the biggest impact on history. His impact on humanity is undisputable. That's the effect we see. The question is, what caused that? We believe God brought Jesus into the world. He's the explanation for Jesus, that he's the one, the Father sent the Son. And, if we look at the effects of Christianity, the effects of the early Jesus movement growing and changing history, changing the cultures around them, that's the effect. What's the cause? Well, we believe Jesus rose from the dead. That's the thing that got the whole movement going, the resurrection, right? Now, a guy named Paul Davies, who actually is a physicist that teaches out at University of Arizona, I believe, maybe Arizona State, one of the schools. He's not a Christian. He's more like a deist, some kind of deist. But he wrote an article back in 2007 that made a lot of skeptics mad. He made this comment. He said, all science proceeds on the assumption that nature is ordered in a rational and intelligible way. He argued that scientists take the orderly laws of physics on faith, and that those laws are all expressed as tidy mathematical relationships. He then asked the questions he's not supposed to ask, but where do these laws come from? And why do they have the form they do? So basically what he was saying was that he was saying this, like when he said in his book, Physics and the Mind of God, he said, even the most atheistic scientist accepts as an act of faith that the universe is not absurd, that there's a rational basis to a physical existence manifested as a law like order in nature that's at least in part comprehensible to us. So science can proceed only if the science accepts an essentially theological worldview. He's basically saying that that the laws of nature, the way the universe starts, there's no, I'll go back in a second. At the beginning of the universe, these laws of nature come into existence. All the laws of nature that get science going. Science can't happen without these laws existing. He's saying, why are these laws set the way they are? Why are they perfectly set up, rational, intelligible, that we can do science? He's basically saying, back here, like he says, why are they expressed as tidy little mathematical relationships? He sees the order of them, that these laws are set up perfectly for scientific discovery. He's saying, why is that? But see, they're not allowed to ask that question in science. They just start from the laws are there, we use them, and we do our science. They don't ask why science. There's no science without the beginning of the universe. There's no science without the laws of nature. Okay. Now, a lot of scientists in the medieval period gave rise to modern science during that period. A lot of them believed that God was behind the laws of nature. Now, some of these guys were deistic. I don't think all of them were bona fide Christians, but some of them were. But they all believed that God was the primary cause of the universe and he created the laws of nature for scientific discovery. Now, there's been a lot written about this in other books where scientific historians of science, have tried to show that really during the medieval period, science couldn't have really gotten off the ground and gotten to where we are today without these guys and what they believed, about God was the explanation behind why they thought science was worth pursuing. James Hannon wrote a book here called The Genesis of Science. He talks about that. You can go to his website. Stephen Meyer talked about this in his book, The Return of the God Hypothesis. Rodney Stark talked about this for the Glory of God in his book, How Monotheism Led to Reformation Science, Witch Hunts to the End of Slavery, but talks about some of the bad spots. But the point is that science we're not saying just because these guys believe God was behind the laws of nature that proves God's existence. That's not what we're saying. We're just saying you need an explanation as to why these early scientists believe that. I don't think they were like going to be burned at the stake if they didn't believe it. There's something in their, certainly the culture they were in Europe, that they had a reason for believing this and how they got science going. So anyway, it's an interesting discussion, but there's a lot of lectures online about this. You can get Meyer's book. He has a chapter on it, and James Hannon work and other ones. But their point is that science came out of a theological worldview. It didn't come out of like a pantheistic worldview or an atheistic worldview. It didn't come out of Hinduism or Buddhism, or it came out of really more of some sort of theistic worldview. Now, when it comes to today, there's kind of like three different models people try to apply in trying to merge science and theology together, science and faith. There's different models out there. One model that certainly has been around for a while that kind of carries on as a conflict model, that faith and science are in conflict with each other, or theology and science, or religion and science are in conflict with each other. Science is obviously more reliable, seen as more reliable. Faith is more subjective, emotional. And a lot of people try to point out where science and religion have conflicted throughout history. Go back and read the Michael Keyes book I had at the beginning of this discussion on his book, The Myths of Science and Religion. Read that book, or get that little PDF I showed you, or ebook. Another view is called the contrast view, and that's where science and faith are distinct, but there's not really a contrast. There's not really conflict because they're really asking different questions. Science is asking the how questions, how the mechanisms works, and theology and religion are dealing with the why questions, the deeper why questions, right? Another view is called convergence. This is where science and faith are distinct from each other. They ask different kinds of questions, but they can interact with each other. So there's like an open dialogue going on where someone might say, how does science answer this question? How does theology answer this question? Like, for example, they used to think the universe was eternal. They always thought the universe existed. Okay, you think the universe existed. Then the cosmological evidence came in, and we found out the universe had a beginning. The scientific evidence came in and said, wow, the universe does have a beginning. That's interesting. Well, theology had always been saying, in the beginning, God created. We always thought God created in the beginning. There had to be a beginning. So you had theology over here always saying there was a beginning point, and then science came in saying there's a beginning point. And so that's where like a convergence would come in there. Now, it doesn't always work that way, but that's an example of like convergence, okay? Now, there was a guy named Stephen Jay Gould who passed away. He used to teach anthropology, a big-time anthropology guy, I believe at Harvard. And he said that there's religion and science are two different domains and they shouldn't overlap. He called it the non-overlapping magisteria. But that led to problems because it really led to, some people liked it, but I don't think it really helped advance the conversation, because he basically is saying that theology is just like, we're back to the issue. Theology is faith. It's not knowledge. It's not testable. And then science is the testable field, the one that you can know things, right? So it kind of led to that theology and science divide, made it even greater. So that didn't really help that much. Some people still like that model. I don't really like it, but anyway. Now, there's always been, of course, a conflict supposedly about evolution. These debates about evolution have gone on and on forever. And supposedly the argument has gone that if evolution is true, God does not exist. Premise 2, evolution is true. Conclusion, therefore, God does not exist. And that's just a terrible way to frame the argument, because it begs the question on how you define evolution. So when someone asks me, I've said this before, if I'm I'm a creationist. I just say, like, do you mean like other than being like a naturalist or a materialist? Are you saying like, do I believe that there's something beyond the natural world, and do I believe only natural explanations? All there is nature, and nature is it? Then I would say no, I don't believe that. I believe that God's a creator and he's behind the natural world. And no, I am not a naturalist or a materialist. So if that's what they mean, then yeah, I'm a creationist. I don't have the faith to believe that, and many people don't as well. I just can't accept this model that the universe was produced by a mindless, undirected, non-conscious process, or the human beings were produced by an undirected, valueless process, or the life somehow emerged from non-living matter, or that all the cosmic cosmons or the cosmic constants happen to be right, and then we just got lucky. The right universe just popped out. We just got lucky with the right universe that somehow came to be, and it was already set up so planet Earth could get going, because you have to have the right universe before you can get the right planet, and everything just happened by chance. I don't think that's makes any sense, and I think that's a huge leap of faith. But some people believe that. I had a girl come up to me today. She said, "Oh, I took a class in high school and we just concluded God didn't exist." So I said, "So are you an accident of nature?" And she said, "Yeah, pretty much. And I kind of like it that way. So it makes me pretty happy." I said, "Well, then you're not really on a truth quest. You're on a happiness quest, right? You don't really care what's true." She's like, "Well, I've looked into it." I said, "Well, I don't think you have, because I don't think you could arrive to the fact that this model right here is that there's good evidence behind these 4 points." Anyways, it's a topic for another time. Okay. So whenever you're talking to somebody about evolution, I've talked about this, you always want to define what they mean by evolution. There's different definitions of evolution. It can mean change over time, which we believe in. History of nature, any sequence of events in nature, yes, that happens. Or number 2, changes in the frequencies in the gene pool of a population. Yes, we believe that. That's fine. Or or the mechanisms responsible for change, like natural selection, acting on random mutations without any guidance or design. We can accept natural selection or random mutation happens, but not without any guidance. That just doesn't make sense. And then, of course, universal common descent is the view we all came from one ancestor, one single common ancestor. That can be debated. Obviously, it is debated. Now, like I said, you just need to get people to find what they mean by evolution. Now, today, evolution has become a lot more than just a biological explanation. It's become an entire worldview. If you look at some of these books, evolution is tied in with economics now. It's tied in with literature, and people try to give evolutionary explanations for religion or science, why we get sick, or psychology or sociology. There's just, evolution has become an entire worldview. It's no longer just a biological explanation. And that's a problem, because that's not what it really started out as. It just has become so much more. Richard Dawkins wrote in his book, The Blind Watchmaker. He calls it The Blind Watchmaker because he agrees, he knows that biology is a study of complicated things that give the appearance of having designed for a purpose. He knows that nature looks like it's designed. It just shows the appearance of being designed. It doesn't mean it's been designed by a designer. It just looks like it's been designed, but it doesn't mean there's a designer. But he agrees that there's many things in nature that definitely look like looks like it's been designed for a purpose. Is that interesting? So when he wrote like the book, The Blind Watchmaker Thesis, which has been critiqued over and over, this is something that we definitely reject. We don't believe that all organisms descended from common ancestors solely through an undirected, unguided, unintelligent, purposeless material process, such as natural selection acting on random mutations or variations. That's just something that the amount of planning and the amount of work to believe nature could do that all on its own without any guidance is just unbelievable. So I think that it's safe to say we reject that. Always bring up this is something I bring up to people, before you get to biological evolution. You may think things you need to remember is the universe needs to be precisely tuned for life. That's what we call the fine tuning of the universe. You have to have a life permitting universe. You can't just get any old universe. You need the right Earth. You need a finely tuned planet, an Earth that is set up to get life going as well. You don't get a right Earth set up until you get the right universe set up. And then you have to show how the origin of living organisms came through just lifeless matter. Before you even get to biological evolution, you have to show life comes from non-life, right? From inorganic matter. So the evidence is much stronger for the fact that our finely tuned universe and planet Earth was planned out. Just like that's what it means. You need a planner to plan something out, that there's a mind behind all that. So I don't really let people get away with it when they jump to biological evolution. I always jump back 3 steps. So you got to get back through these 3 things before you jump to that. Now, there is a lot of debate these days over some of the problems with the standard evolutionary model. Even guys that aren't Christians, guys like James Shapiro, they think that there needs to be a do-over on some of the old models of evolution. They're just the science has come in that there's stuff that definitely needs to be rethought. There needs to be new models, and they have come out with some different ideas. There's a website called The Third Way, but there is a debate about that. These guys that wrote What Darwin Got Wrong, these 2 authors here, they are not Christians or atheists, but they agree there's really legitimate questions in the whole Darwinian model, that there's problems with the old model that's been just repeated over and over in college campuses forever. Thomas Nagel wrote a book. He's another atheist. He wrote a book called Mind and Cosmos, Why the Materialist Neo-Darwinian Conception of Nature is Almost Certainly False. He's not even a Christian. But look what he says here. He says, whatever one may think about the possibility of a designer, the prevailing doctrine that the appearance of life from dead matter, its evolution through accidental mutation, natural selection, to its present forms is involved nothing but the operation of physical law. That's like he's saying without God. Cannot be regarded as unassailable. It is an assumption governing the scientific project rather than a well-confirmed scientific hypothesis. So he's kind of an interesting guy. He's a philosopher. He teaches, I think, up in New York State, or maybe Columbia, one of those schools, but he just doesn't accept the entire Darwinian paradigm about how that supposedly explains a lot of things. He doesn't accept it, and that's why when some of these scientists, these evolutionists, met back in 2016 at the Royal Society in London, they said that we need to update evolution. There's like I said, the old synthesis needs to be rethought, and there needs to be new models put forward, and they're still working on that. But I'm just bringing this up because don't let anyone tell you like the old model that we've been given for decades and decades is just like so legit and rock solid that you can't even question it. That's just, those people say they just have to be completely ignorant. Okay, there's just no way around it. They just simply don't know. Now, when intelligent design got started, it really, the movement really picked up a lot of steam over the last 30 years. Basically, intelligent design, just a quick definition. I know I've done a whole other teaching on this, but intelligent design really is what they're saying is specific object or event can't be the result of an unguided natural process, or a specific object or event can't be the result of chance or coincidence. So in contrast, they believe there's an intelligent agent involved. There's a being, a mind, that obviously a being with the ability to think, has a will, plans ahead, forethought, just like we're actually intelligent agents, as you know, as humans. But when they're looking at certain features of the natural world, intelligent design says it can't be explained by an unguided natural process. Now, they also seek to kind of give a broader definition of science, because the standard definition of science is definition 1, where it says here, science pursues materialistic explanations for natural phenomena through empirical observation, rational theorizing. This definition excludes any non-natural explanations, unscientific in principle, and thus excludes intelligence as having causal primacy in any natural system. So intelligent design kind of tries to broaden it out to definition number 2, where they say, you know, science pursues the best explanation for natural phenomena through empirical observation, rational theorizing. Under this definition, the best explanation for natural process may include intelligent causes. Okay. So really, that what intelligent design says is that this debate is really a lot about philosophy. It's not even about science. It's about philosophy of science. Okay. So there's a ton of literature on intelligent design. Stephen Meyer's book, like I said, is one of the most current books that came out over the last couple of years. In his book, he argues, he calls it the 3 scientific discoveries that reveal the mind behind the universe. He literally, I mean, he gives a lot of history in these arguments. They're not just like, they're very well researched, a lot of good documentation. He talks about the history of the study of the beginning of the universe, or the fine-tuning of the universe, or the origin of life. So his argument is that the best explanation for those things is a mind, is an intelligent mind, that being God. And then he argues more for a theistic God in this. He's not talking about just some higher power or deistic God or pantheistic God. So that's a really good book if you want to go deeper on that. But that's one of the more current books. Okay. Just one last thing I want to mention. There are some Christians that have definitely gone towards the direction of what we call theistic evolution, where they believe God has used evolution as a mechanism. And, you know, it's not that all those definitions of evolution I gave on the other slide, it's not that no kinds of evolution are real. I mean, even young earth creationists believe in natural selection, random mutation, as far as I know. I saw that on their website. But the point is that some of these people have gone on, like, to really embrace some things about evolution that don't seem to make a lot of sense. But there's a lot of critiques of them. You can get some of these books about the whole theistic evolution camp if you want to go deeper. But anyway. Okay. Well, I think that's about it. Just remember some of the things you can ask people, some of these questions about science when you're talking to them, some of the things, these are just kind of the overview of some of the things you can talk about with them. Anyway, there's certainly much more I could say, but please try to get these little booklets here. You can, like I say, you can download them if you want to go deeper. They're really short. They're like 20, 30 pages, easily understandable, accessible. If you can just go to the website here, like I said, if you missed the beginning, go to the website right here. Click resources. Those little ebooks are there. But don't waste them, because they're really good resources. Okay. So having said that, I think that's about it. And I will stop there.